All right, so today we are digging into a 2,400-year-old solution for a problem that feels incredibly modern. That dreaded moment when you run out of things to say. We're going to break down a really simple but powerful method from ancient Greece that can totally change the way you talk to people, and hopefully make sure you never have to face that awkward silence again.
You know the feeling, right? We have all been there. You're talking to someone, maybe on a date or at a party, and everything's going fine. And then, poof, nothing. Just a wall of static in your brain where your next sentence is supposed to be. It's that awful sinking feeling of a conversation just grinding to a halt.
You've already talked about the weather, you asked what they do for a living, where they're from, all the usual stuff is out of the way. The source material for this actually tells the story of a disastrous first date where this exact thing happened like 10 minutes in. The easy topics were gone, and you could just feel that painful silence creeping in. And that's when the panic sets in. Your brain is just scrambling, but it's coming up completely empty. And what do? You might find yourself just staring at your phone, trying to fill the void. Before you know it, you're forcing out some generic, dead-end question, and you can practically feel the energy just draining out of the room. And, yep, that's the result. A failed connection. In that story, the date ended early, and he never got a text back. It's a terrible feeling, right? And it can make you think, man, I'm just bad at conversation. But what if the problem isn't you? What if it's just your technique?
Well, the solution comes from a really unlikely place and an even more unlikely guru. To find him, we have to travel way back in time to a guy who, honestly, had every social disadvantage you could possibly imagine.
Okay, so let's go back to Athens, Greece, around 470 BC. This is where we meet our guide, Socrates. And by all historical accounts, he was not some charismatic, handsome figure. In fact, he was famously considered one of the ugliest men in a city that was obsessed with physical beauty. So by the time he was 30, he was pretty much a nobody. He had no money, no social status, and definitely no looks to fall back on. He was basically a social zero. But he had been quietly developing one skill, a skill so powerful it would end up making him a legend. His superpower wasn't that he was a great talker, it was that he was a master at making other people talk. He knew how to engage people and just draw them out. And this skill was so potent that by the time he was 40, the most powerful people in Greece, we're talking generals, politicians, the absolute elite, were all competing for his time just to have a conversation with him. So what was his secret? How did he do it? Well, it wasn't by being some brilliant speaker who just dominated the room. It was the exact opposite. He developed a technique that we can call the Socratic pull method. Now, the heart of this technique is a huge shift in your goal for a conversation. See, most of us operate in a push mindset. We're trying to push our own funny stories, our own clever thoughts, our own experiences. Socrates did the complete opposite. His entire focus was on pulling the story out of the other person. And the best part? It is a super simple 3-step process. Seriously, that's it. First, you listen for something he called the thread. Second, you pull on that thread with a specific kind of question. And third, this is key. You chain your questions together. Let's break that down. So what exactly is the thread? It's not just any word. While most of us are just waiting for our turn to speak, Socrates was listening for the one word or topic that the other person said with a little bit of extra passion, a little more energy. That is your way in. The source material gives this perfect example. Socrates is talking to a fish merchant who just briefly mentions fish. Now, a normal person might ask a boring question like, "Oh, you sell fish?" and get a simple yes, and then silence. But Socrates pulls the thread. He asks a question that invites the other person to be the expert. How do you judge quality?
The merchant gives a pretty simple answer. I judge it by the smell. Now, for most of us, that feels like another dead end. You might say, interesting, and the conversation dies. But for Socrates, that one word, smell, isn't an ending. It's the beginning of the very next link in the chain.
And right here is where you see the most powerful part of this whole technique. He takes the very last concept the merchant gave him, smell, and he chains his next question directly to it. He asks, "And where did you learn to do that?" And just look at what happens, a chain reaction. The merchant says, "My father taught me." So Socrates latches onto that last word, father, and pulls again. And did your father fish, or was he a trader? Do you see what just happened? In 3 simple questions, the conversation went from the generic topic of fish to this man's personal history, his father, his childhood. It instantly got deeper and more meaningful. And this is the brilliant result. The story goes that the merchant talked for an entire hour, And afterwards, he walked away telling everyone that Socrates was the most fascinating, most charismatic person he had ever met. And the crazy part is, Socrates barely said anything at all. He just listened and pulled.
Okay, that's great for some guy in ancient Athens, but how does this actually work for us today? In that awkward first date or at a networking event? Let's look at how this Socratic pull can turn boring small talk into a real story. This slide shows the difference perfectly. On the left, you've got the pushing questions. They're just factual, and they lead to dead ends. But on the right, the pulling questions open up whole new doors. So if someone mentions they work in marketing, instead of asking where, pull the thread. What's a part of marketing that most people never get to see? If they say they're from a small town, ask, what's one thing everyone gets wrong about that town? You see, you're not asking for data, you're asking for their unique perspective. And this leads to the big aha moment from the source material. The problem was never that you ran out of things to say. I mean, think about it. The person you're talking to is an entire universe of stories and experiences you know nothing about. The real problem was that you were focused on the wrong thing. You were stuck in your own head trying to think of something interesting about yourself instead of just being curious about them. So this brings us to the core philosophy, the big takeaway from the Socratic method. And honestly, it's like a conversational superpower. The goal is not to be interesting. The goal is to be interested. When you really truly adopt this mindset, all that pressure to perform just vanishes. You suddenly realize you don't have to carry the entire conversation on your back. You just have to be the one who turns the key. The secret to never running out of things to say was never about your words. It's about unlocking theirs. This ancient technique gives you the power to go beyond the surface with literally anyone you meet. It can turn mundane small talk into a real, meaningful connection. So I guess the only question left is, whose story are you going to unlock first?